Rife Lake doing some fishing, and tonight I'm going to set up a rod. So I just took off this lead core off of that. It's a 5500 Abu line counter. It's got 4 colors of lead core on it. Normally I run a 5-color hybrid lead core setup. That one I lost a color because of that, got too many kinks in it. So I'm going to rig up this rod, which I had it on. It's a 7.6 kokanee black. It's a 4 to 10 medium light. And I'm going to rig it up with just regular line for trolling, and I'm going to put it on that 100 Lexa right there. So you've seen that reel in some of our videos before. That's a brand new reel, and I'm just going to show you what I do to spool it up. So just to start with, I've got obviously something to cut the line with. I got a little terminal tackle there. There's a 10-pound trilene big game I'll put on the arbor, and then I'll go to 20-pound dextron, or not dextron, destron, which is Cast King. I use quite a bit of it. We'll talk about more about that. And then I'm going to top shot it with 20-pound Maxima. And the reason I'm going to 20-pound is not because you need 20-pound to catch trout, but we've been using the Gibbs Delta sliding sinkers that come out of BC, and they clip on the line, and they have a little ring on the back. Pete's got a video on it that you snap your line into, and it holds it off of away from your presentation, and then when the fish hits, the line will snap tight and it'll slide down to your terminal tackle. And it just doesn't work that well with 10 or 12-pound test or whatever we've been fishing with. So I'm going to top shot that with 20 so I can run that Gibbs sinker on it specifically. So I'll do a little rigging up here, tie some knots for you, and we'll get back into it. So I saved you the tedium of weaving that through the frame of the reel. Obviously, you have to go through the level wind, and you want to go around the reel the direction that it's going to spin. And I've got that done. Now I'm going to tie an arbor knot on there. If you're not familiar with an arbor knot, it's not really that complex of a knot. You have to pull a little loop out here, which you probably can't see. I'll see if I can pull it up here so you can actually see it. Essentially, all you're doing is taking the loop of the line and you're tying an overhand knot around that loop. Do you find it, Pete?
Yep.
And then I'm not going to tighten that all the way down. I've just got a loop around the belly there. I'm going to tighten that down a little bit. And then on the tag end here, we're going to tie a little jam knot, which is just another overhand loop. Oh, my eyes just aren't as good as they used to be. So that overhand loop, you can tighten that one down quite a bit. And I'll trim the tag end after I get it cinched down to the arbor of the reel. So now what we've got is the line going to the spool. And we're going to pull all that mess through here. And what it should do is cinch right down on the arbor of the reel. And as it comes down, our knots will tighten up, and we're just going to milk it just a little bit there to get it snug. We don't want it too tight because it has to be able to flow through there. And then that tag end is going to come down and actually cinch up. Is what's actually going to cinch up for us. Let me see what I got here. I don't know if I got it or not. I think I did. So essentially you have a loop with another loop on the end that's a jam knot for the whole thing, and it comes down on the center of the arbor like that, and you just work it and snug it up until it's tight on there. So you're just trying to get a loop on there. And it helps when you start it out if wherever you start your reel on the, or wherever you start your line on the arbor, if it's lined up with the level wind, so you don't get a bunch of sideways back and forth. Now I'm going to trim that tag end down. So I've just got a knot in there. At this point, I do all of that stuff before I put any of this on the line spooler. So you can do this without a line spooler. I usually use this cheapy little Piscafun or whatever the hell it is. This works for spinning reels or level wind reels because you can loosen this up, and this will actually spin with a spinning reel, so you're not getting continuous twists on your spinning reel. The line will run with it. We don't really need it to spin this time because we're doing it with a casting reel. And then of course that part opens up, You're gonna put your line in there, and it's, you know, it's a cheesy little thing. It's not super fancy. Essentially all this does is hold your line there, so if you don't have a spare hand or a friend helping you, it's a little bit easier. And then the reel mounts to this whole mess, and we'll just snug that up. So back to what we're putting on this. Again, this is 10-pound big game. I never put braid right onto the spool of a reel, even if it's a braid ready spool. So I reset my counter to 0 there. I need some drag, it looks like. Now you have to make sure it actually takes a couple turns before that thing will cinch up on there, and now we're spooling, right? So I set my counter to 0. And I don't really necessarily need to. I just want to make sure that I know how much I'm putting on there. I don't put a ton of this backing on here. Essentially all this does is keep your braid from spinning on the arbor. If you can't get it tight or tagged down on that arbor somehow, there is a chance that that whole thing could spin while you're trying to fight a fish or whatever. So right there, I've essentially got the arbor covered, and that's all I'm trying to do. And I've only put about 20 feet of that 10-pound big game on there. So at this point, I'm going to take that big game off of here, right? I'll get myself a little bit because I'm going to tie some knots, and I'll just leave that piece there for later. Now I'm going to go to our Destron. This is Casking Destron. It's a 4-carrier braid. I've had good luck with it. I got a lot of it. It's nothing super special or fancy. There's tons of good braids out there, so whichever one you like, go ahead and use. The Addicted Enforcer is really good braid. There's tons of them. Power Pro is one of my favorites. I just happen to have a lot of this Destron right now. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tie a uni knot, uni to uni, right? So I've overlapped these two quite a bit, you can see, and I'm just going to start tying a uni. If you're not familiar with that, essentially what that is one side of it over here is going to get a uni knot. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is kind of fielder's choice how many of these you want to do. I usually use 7 on the braid end, 6, 7. So I use a uni knot on anything up to about 20 pounds. And once you get over 20 pounds, it's not so much the strength of the knot that I find different, but when you get up to, when you're tying salmon rigs and things like that, uni to uni knots on a salmon rig, say you're using 40-pound braid and 40-pound a 40-pound leader or something like that. 40 is pretty hard to tie a uni. They get pretty big. So I might go to an all-braid or a double all-braid on something like that, but 20-pound you can easily do this. So right now I'm tying 10-pound big game to 20-pound braid. 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm only going to do 6 on this side because I don't want the knot to be huge. So essentially that's all I've got there is a loop, and it's tied on itself. And then once you cinch that down, now you don't want to pull it all the way tight because this one will actually get tight on that braid pretty quickly. So at this point you've got a uni here and a uni there, and you're sliding those together a little bit, right? So I'm going to slide them together, and I'm going to just milk them a little bit one at a time to try and make sure that our knots are snug and we don't have a bunch of bunched up garbage in the middle of it. So I'll cinch it down a little bit. I'll pull it tight again. Cinch it, cook them all. Okay. Cinch it down a little bit. Pull it tight again. And once those two unis are, it's probably almost possible to see on the camera, but once those two unis are up against each other like that, essentially that's things jammed. Short of that knot coming apart, that's not, unless the line breaks, that's not going to come apart, okay? So you need some kind of decent scissors. You can cut mono with anything, but this braid won't cut with just anything. So you need some kind of decent scissors that'll snug or snip that braid off fairly clean. And I'm just using, I think these are Bubba or something, but I use them for fishing. I like fishing scissors a whole lot more than most of the other clippers and cutters. Now you can tag these things down with glue or anything like that. I essentially just leave them tied like that because then I can see if the knot's coming apart. So there's a uni to uni right there, right? So now I'm going to take my Destron and I'm going to get it onto my winder because I'm going to put a lot of this on there. This is basically our main line. That 10-pound that's on there shouldn't ever see the water in theory. I just use it to cover up the arbor. So we'll snug this down here. And like I said, this thing's a little chintzy. It's nothing fancy. You can get much better ones than this, but this one works for me. And then I want to make sure I'm going to roll it back this way. I'm going to open the reel. I'm going to roll it back this way until I get all the crisscrosses and stuff out of here, right? So everything's lined up with my level wind. So now what I have is, see how it's crisscrossed there? There we go. We're right in line with our level wind right there. Now I'm going to close the action of that thing and I'm going to start cranking up. And we're just going to fill the reel with it essentially. So like I said, this is going to get a top shot. And the top shot does two things for me. Number one, it gets that colored braid away from the actual fishing presentation. On this rig up, it's going to be 20-pound, so those Gibbs Delta sliding sinkers will work better on that 20-pound top shot than they will on any of the other stuff that I'm going to have on this reel. And you do want to put this under tension, not a ton of tension. I mean, it's not that critical that it's super tight, but you don't want to spool a reel loose, especially braid, because braid will actually get under itself and cause jam ups and stuff like that. It's kind of a pain in the ass that way. And that's the reason I use 20-pound braid on any level wind, at least 20-pound braid. I don't go anything less than that on a level wind reel for that very reason, because if it gets too fine, it'll dig down between the layers and you end up with, you know, that's a pretty big hang up sometimes, especially if you're fighting fish. You can have the smoothest drag in the world, but if all your stuff is all hung up under another layer of braid, I just find that 20 works the best. And of course, you know, if you're fishing for bigger fish, a lot of times you go way bigger than that. I forget what I've got in the shop: 20, 40, 50, 65, 80. I've got tons of it. The nice thing about braid, well, there's a couple nice things about braid. It's limp, it's abrasion resistant, cuts the water better than monofilament, and we'll talk about that when we get to the top shot, or hell, we can talk about it now. The top shot I'm going to put on this is 20-pound Maxima Ultra Green. Just that's what I had handy. A lot of times I will top shot things with fluorocarbon. It's not necessary to have fluorocarbon as a top shot for any reason other than I like the properties of fluorocarbon. I like the fact that fluorocarbon is neutrally buoyant or sinking, and fluorocarbon tends to be a little bit more abrasion resistant than copolymer monofilaments. So I use a lot of fluorocarbon. Of course, all our leaders are fluorocarbon. I do think fluorocarbon leaders make a big difference because fluorocarbon is essentially invisible in the water, or very difficult to see compared to some other things. I mean, there's species that you can get away with tying braid straight onto stuff and still catch fish, but trout aren't one of them usually. So let's see, I'm down to 540. I'll be down to 500 here. So that'll be 400 feet on this reel when I'm down to 500. I can't really see needing more than 400 feet, but I do like to get those reels relatively full, because you have a lot of speed advantage with when you're on the top of the spool, and of course you have strength advantage when you're on the bottom of the spool. It's just a simple mechanical advantage thing. So I might spool this down to maybe 400. That'll give us 600 feet of line on this spool, and then I'll top shot it with about 40 feet of 20-pound. So there's 400 feet. Okay. So now let's back this off, and we'll tie our last set of uni knots here, and you'll be able to see a lot better here because the uni knot for 20 to 20 pound braid to 20 pound mono is significantly larger than it is from 10 to 20. It'll still flow through the eyes and stuff real well, but it's bigger, that's for sure. So this is, I mean, as far as mono goes, this is one of my favorite monos. Maxima Ultra Green. It's pretty big here in the Northwest anyway, but I've just had really good luck with it. It's pretty tough stuff. It's usually stronger than what they rate it for. So here we go. I'm overlapped again. I probably overlapped a good 10 inches, right? If you're really worried about wasting line, you probably don't need that much, but I don't see that well, and at least close up. So I'm gonna tie my little loop there, start spinning in here. I'm gonna do 7 on the braid. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can do 8 if you want to. Let's throw 8 on there, it'll be fun. You don't have to lubricate braid like you do mono. It just doesn't seem to make a huge difference. Especially some of the braids are fairly slick anyway, like the Power Pro Super or Slick 8, I think it's called, has a like a slickery coating on it of some kind, and I don't even know if moisture would help it at all. So there, I've got my uni knot right there. Now I'm going to tie another uni in the 20 here. 1, 2, and this is harder to tie around that limp little stuff. 3, and you'll see when I cinch it down, there's 4. It's a little harder to cinch down too. 5. We'll go ahead and put 6 on this one too. 6. So now, see, look how long that is, right? So now I'll start coming up on this thing. Now this has to be able to slide over the braid, so you don't want to tighten that down too much, right? And then I'm going to start trying to bring it down to the braid. I don't want to just ram it up there and get it all knotted up. I don't want layers of knots on top of layers of knots. So you just got to kind of work your way through this process and try and make your knots neat and tidy. The tidier the knot is, the more strength you'll actually, the actual holding strength of the knot will be. So I'm getting close there. Right there, I'll probably snug down both sides a little bit. So I'm pulling the tag ends there. Now I'm back to the main line, pulling the two together. So right there I have the 2 knots laying up against each other. This is the hardest one to snug up, is this end of it where it knots up on the braid, because if you don't get that one snug, that one can come loose. That's the easiest one to come loose, because 20 pound is fairly stiff to tie a uni on, and it looks like we've got a good snug knot. I don't know if you guys can see it or not. So it's not so much that it's long, but it's very tall, right? So if you have a rod with very small eyelets, that's why you don't, you know, it's hard to tie a casting setup like this, because these knots will impact the casting distance. But we're using these rigs for trolling, which is why we can not worry so much about the sizes of the knots and all that stuff. You do want them to be snipped down tight and neat. And in this instance, you could put a little glue or something on that just to smooth it out. That might help you get it through the eyes and all of that stuff while you're trolling. So now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm just going to spool up this and make sure we're not wrapped around a bunch of stuff like it looks like we are. There we go. And then we're going to get it back in our rig in here. said, I don't need to put a ton of this on here. 40 is probably even more than I need. So again, I'm going to get in line with the level wind there, and I'm going to start cranking it on there. So I'm going to go down to 360 on this one. .360, and then I'm just going to loosen that up. I will tie some terminal tackle on the end of it once I get it on the rod, but that's not that critical to show you because you guys have all seen that 100 times. So I have to be able to thread that on the rod before I tie the terminal tackle on it, because the terminal tackle won't go through the eyes. And for terminal tackle on these for trout trolling, here's what I'm using: dual lock snap, bead chain, fielder's choice there, and then 2 8mm beads. This keeps it from getting sucked up in the eye of the rod. It also gives you good visibility when you can see it. Now we're running leaders on all this, so this doesn't snap right to a lure. So this big wad of stuff here is not the biggest deal in the world. We're still running a 40, 50, sometimes 60-inch fluorocarbon leader behind it with our lure. So this is just the way I set up my trolling setups. And that's what I'll put on this rod right here. So hopefully that kind of demonstrated to you the hows and wheres and the whys of what we do. And